You know when you go download an app and you get that pop-up message asking if you agree to all the terms and conditions? Do you actually ever read those? No, nobody reads those. So we do what everyone does and we select agree and we move on. There was a lawyer that decided to read through one particular social media's terms, and he decided to point them out for us, that for those of us that don't really like to read through all the terms and conditions. And he pointed out a few things. One, people might pay us to use your pictures, but we won't actually pay you. Also, we may randomly delete your post. Another thing is we can force you to give up your username for any reason. And lastly, we may share your personal information with other companies. To sum it all up, creepy, right? Here's the deal. The terms are subject to change. It's not just the terms and the conditions in our apps that are subject to change. Life is subject to change. See, we all have our own terms and conditions or expectations of the way we think life should look. And then one day, life completely rearranges things on us. We are all currently in the midst of our life changing right now. We are isolated, we're shut in, and we're unable to hang out with our friends. Change can be a good or bad thing. Either way, I think we all can struggle with change for a couple of reasons. The first thing being, it forces us into the unknown. Into the unknown! Frozen 2, anyone? Kind of lame. Go with me on it. Changes don't come with a guaranteed set of terms and conditions. So until we know how things turn out, things can often be stressful. The second thing is we lose perspective. Change can be emotional. And when that happens, we go back and forth on how we react, whether it be good or bad. And it causes us to realize that we're not in control. If you think about it, we spend a lot of time and our energy trying to control what happens all around us. We study to make good grades and we practice to be better. The question we need to address isn't necessarily how do we avoid change. The question we need to ask is how can we make it through the change? The Bible has some things to say about this. And what the Bible says can actually comfort and carry us through the things and the changes that life will throw our way. You see, thousands of years ago, God chose a group of people known as the Israelites to be His people. God wanted them to live differently than every other people group in the world. So what He did was He gave them a set of laws on how to live great lives that would set them apart from everyone else. It started with about 10 rules, but eventually became to about 613 laws. Yeah, that's a lot. They had laws for just about every part of their life. Like what to eat, what not to eat, what to wear, what not to wear, and how to worship God. Crazy, right? Some of those rules for worship stated that only certain people could enter the inner part of the temple, which was kind of like their church. And only a smaller, more elite group could actually experience God's presence. So the rules for worship were really strict. Now fast forward to a few centuries later when something revolutionary happened. It's when God entered the world as a real person, Jesus, and He shared the truth that His love wasn't just for the Jewish people, but His love was for the whole world. His love was for everyone. And then after being put to death to show just how great His love was, Jesus came back to life. And when Jesus defeated death, it changed everything. It's the whole Easter story, right? But then Jesus left the world. And once life returned to somewhat normal, the Jewish people who had become followers of Jesus were shaken up. Their religion, which they had faithfully practiced every day for generations, went from 613 rules to one relationship. Did God's laws have terms and conditions? Were these rules that they had known for their whole lives, for generations, subject to change? You can see they had concerns. So a letter was sent to address them. It's called Hebrews, and Hebrews is a book in the Bible written to the Jewish people who followed Jesus. And towards the end of the letter, the author of Hebrews wrote his final thoughts, and he makes this particular statement. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, he says, "Don't love money. Be satisfied with what you have. For God has said, I will never fail you. I will never abandon you." And that may seem like a weird thing to hear right now, but it made total sense at the time. See, being a Jewish Jesus follower back then wasn't easy. One of the changes that came with following Jesus meant you were in danger of losing everything, losing your property, losing your money. But even with the scary threat of all the potential change like this, the author was reminding the Jewish believers of something that they already knew to be true because they had heard it all of their lives. God would never abandon or fail them. Basically, what the writer is saying is, hey, a lot is changing, I get it, but God's character hasn't changed at all. Now, a few verses later, he makes a similar statement that I think could help all of us as we're facing a life that is definitely changing right now in the midst of us. Hebrews 13:8 says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Even though the circumstances had changed, Jesus himself had not changed. He was the representation of the same God that they had been following since they first encountered him. Yeah, the way they lived and worshiped was changing in a major way. Instead of following hundreds of rules, they were now free to simply follow one person, Jesus. So that meant no more rules about who could go where in the temple to worship. It meant that his Spirit was now available to everyone, not to just a select few. Sound kind of similar to where we currently are today? Not able to worship? Not able to meet in groups? You see, in the middle of change, we have no clue how things are going to turn out. And that's why the writer of Hebrews reminded the Jewish believers, and he reminds us today, even though a lot is changing, that we can trust that Jesus himself does not change. You see, their circumstances had changed, but God's character hadn't changed one bit. They learned something huge, something that applies to you and I today. And that's that life changes, God doesn't. While everything around us is subject to change and it makes you feel out of control, you can walk with the one who is actually in control. Jesus never changes. He was good thousands of years ago, and he's still good today. Your circumstances in life will change, but his character never will. It's important for you and I to stay focused on the one, Jesus, who can keep us balanced. So how do we do that? If you think back, I bet you could remember a specific time or maybe a moment in your life when God came through for you. Maybe it was a time when your family was struggling and you prayed for help to get through it, and God got you through it. Maybe he's helped calm you in anxiety or stress. Or maybe he's answered a specific prayer. I want you to take some time to think through your past and come up with some specific times of how God stayed the same whenever the life around you didn't. Once you remember that moment of time when he showed up, I want you to write it down. And I want you to keep it in front of you. Doing this, I think, reminds us that God has shown up in the past, and it will encourage us to know that he's still the same today and that he can show up today as well. Write it down and put it in a place that you'll see it. Like write it on the bathroom mirror, or take out your phone and put it in the notes app. Wherever it is, write it down. It may feel lame, might kind of sound lame, but I think seeing these reminders will help us see things more clearly, that when life feels out of control, God is still in control. Change is going to happen. We are in the midst of life change right now, all being isolated, shut in, and unable to hang out with our friends and groups. Sometimes changes will be good, and sometimes not so much. The truth we all need to realize is that life changes, God doesn't. He's the same loving God that He's always been. We can't avoid change, but we can make it through the change. Why? Because even though life changes, God doesn't. Look, we love you guys. I want to encourage you to reach out to your small groups because we're all feeling a little angst and feel a little bit of anxiety right now. And we're all experiencing the same thing of not really being able to do much. So reach out and connect with your small group leaders. Guys, we love you and we're praying for you and we are longing for the day we're all back together. Love you guys. See you soon.